Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Julie Moose, Executive Director of the National Press Club Journalism Institute. I am so happy to be here with two outstanding journalists, Kelley Benham French and Jessica Contrera. Kelley is an award-winning Pulitzer-honored writer and editor, now narrative editor for the USA Today Network, and a professor at Indiana University. Jessica is an enterprise reporter at the Washington Post. She joined the Post in 2014 after graduating from Indiana University, where she and Kelley worked together. They will be discussing the power of details and how details help connect people to a shared understanding, even with something as overwhelming as the coronavirus. So the conversation will begin between the two of them, and then we'll start to bring in your questions. So as soon as you start to have questions, please do add them to the Q&A queue that you'll see below, and we'll bring them in a little bit later in the program. But first, we're going to start with Kelley and Jessica. Thank you for joining us. And let's start here. How do you both learn to see and teach others to see those telling details that convey a story's purpose?
You get to go first. You're the teacher.
Oh, great. Thank you. So to me, one of the biggest part is getting people to understand that every detail has to have a job, and that details can do different kinds of jobs, right? There are details that reveal character. There are details that reveal status. There are details that trigger emotions. There are details that help connect people to other people who are different from them. And there are details that show ways that people are unique. Like there are all these different kinds of details. And so when we go out and report, we have this huge net. We come back with all this stuff and we don't know what to do with it. And in order to figure out what details you use, you really have to have a clear sense of purpose about what you're trying to say. And I think that's kind of a long answer, but selecting and identifying details always comes down to a clarity of vision and a focus for what you want the story to do. And that has to come ideally when you're still reporting. It's really hard to do that after the fact. When, you've got to have it. You've got to have the idea of what you're trying to show while you're reporting so that you can ask the right question that gets you to the right detail. So it's actually like a long process.
I feel like I'm not, it's so hard to know them in the moment though. So I feel like I just do my net super big, figure it out later. I don't know. I think it's, I'm looking or asking or I'm just trying to feel things, right? Like if you feel it in your gut, it's a good detail. Like if you're like, oh my gosh, you just like, I star it right in your notebook. And I think to your point about giving everything a purpose, I'm often asking why, right? So you can write down a detail like, that this person is wearing a cross around their neck, and you probably end up throwing that away unless you ask like, oh, tell me about your what's on your neck, and they might tell you that it, sorry, you can hear my dog barking. They might tell you that, that was given to them by whoever they're writing about. I'm making up a hypothetical story. It's probably not the best example, but if the cross then has purpose, then it's a detail worth keeping, right? So a lot of times when I'm doing scene reporting, which like RIP, where I was taking down a lot of all the details and then going back and maybe asking later if I don't want to interrupt the scene, what does this mean? Why did you do this? Why are you wearing this? Why is this on your wall? That kind of thing. So you're looking for the meaning in the details, even if it's not apparent to you at first.
Yeah, and just like every other part of the writing process, it's not linear at all. Like it's kind of a funnel. Like you're just hoovering up everything, and you don't know what it's about, and then you start selecting, and then you start circling around, like asking about that detail, asking about that detail, asking about that thing, and then all of a sudden the thing might take a whole turn you didn't expect, and then you have to go back and ask about the other thing that you didn't ask about. So it's a constant winnowing, but the narrower you can get with your focus, the more detail you can include in your story. So in order to have a story that is rich and evocative and emotional, you have to eventually arrive at a tight focus. And that really helps with the selection and with the reporting, when you can kind of get down to like, I'm writing this scene and I need to explain these 5 minutes in time to this reader, because 5 minutes on a page is a long time. You only need, you know, a half a dozen great details to make a story work.
Especially now, because I think everyone's capacity is for reading, especially heart-wrenching stories, is just lower. And so I want to make sure I'm trying to make my stories tighter. I'm trying to choose details more carefully so that, you know, the precious time that they've given me to read, I'm really giving them a lot of bang for their buck. Mm-hmm. But it probably should always be that way.
You both mentioned scene and sort of, you know, implied some things about the use of your senses in collecting information and casting the net wide. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about how you deliberately use some of those things and coach others to use some of those things to both understand the scene yourself and also set the scene for your readers.
So a classic piece of advice is to report with the 5 senses, right? Well, it's gotten harder to do now because we're cut off from everything. But the sense that we report with the most is our sight, is for sight and sound. We try to watch things unfold and describe them, and we listen for what's going on, and we use a ton of quotes. So one of the simplest things is just to get people listening for dialogue rather than a quote told to a reporter, because one of the most common edits that I make is when someone is trying to describe a scene and they're trying to put the reader inside a moment. They're, you know, coming home with the ER nurse at the end of a long day and the kids want to hug her, but she's got to change clothes first. Let's say you're trying to write that scene. And then the commonly a reporter will step on the scene by just dropping in a quote that's just something told to a reporter. It was heartbreaking. I couldn't hug him. It was heartbreaking. Or, you know, it's the hardest part of my day, quote. Just trying to take that generalization and break it into pieces and say, well, like, how does it feel in your body when you can't hug your kid? What are the steps that you go through before you can hug your kid? Like, explain them to me, you know, like, here's what I do when I get, it's breaking that quote into like 500 pieces and then choosing the most important ones. So that's sound. And then really getting past sight and sound down to smell and touch, because smell and touch are the 2 senses that are most tied to emotion. And that's what we're trying to do with these details, right? So I read a ProPublica story today about a doctor who's trying to prevent amputations in the Deep South. And high in the story was the smell when he walked in the room and he knew that this guy's foot was rotten. He said it was rancid like dead mice. I'm like, man, I'm like never gonna forget that detail because smell is so goes straight to your gut. What about you, Jess?
Yeah, it's so hard not being able to, you know, I find myself explaining what Kelley just said, like, to the people that I'm interviewing, you know, saying like, if these were normal times, like, you know, yes, we do interviews like this, but I would just come with you to the ER. You know, I would be there, you know, when you walk in that patient's room, and I would be able to see everything you're seeing, smell everything you're smelling, you know, be able to watch the expressions change on your face and on your patient's face. And I can't do any of that right now. So I need you to help me. And I'm just like laying it all out there, because it really helps them have a sense of what it is that I'm looking for. And I think it's really important right now, especially to sort of like, I can't think of a better phrase for it, but like model vulnerability. And Kelley and I were talking about how when I first get on the phone with someone now, I try to ask not how are you, but like, how are you holding up? Like, there's like a difference. There's that subtle difference that's kind of saying like, this is a different time. And they might still say, oh, I'm good. But then they'll ask me how I am. And I never say like, oh, I'm good. I just say, honestly, like, I'm taking it an hour at a time sometimes. Like, this has been a lot, and it's just sort of showing, that's the kind of conversation that I want to have with you. And another reporter at the Post, Teresa Vargas, was talking about this really smart thing that she does, which is that if she wants someone to describe a scene, or especially like a place, since we all can't go to places right now, she will sort of model her. So she would say, like, instead of asking, Kelley, can you describe for me like where it is that you sit down to work every day? She would say like, okay, so I'm going to describe to you, my work area, and then I want you to do the same thing for me. So in my work area, like, I've got my keyboard in front of me and there's a bunch of crumbs in it. And I'm trying to turn on music, but like my kids are screaming in the background. And she's just showing them like, this is kind of the level of detail that I'm looking for. And I have found that kind of stuff to be really, really helpful, because you're basically depending on the people that you're writing about to be all this, to be those five senses for you so often right now.
And just even in better times, we usually don't prep our sources enough for what we're trying to do. Right. And if we can, there's a huge power differential, right, between the reporter and the source. And sometimes we think that they have the power because they have something that we need. Clearly we have all the power, and the more we can invite them into our process and explain our process and get on the same side with them, the better things are going to go. And I mean, 5 or 10 minutes on the front end is so valuable. And I always have my students, and reporters I work with, and it's a little bit controversial, but when we have a draft or we have a first draft of a scene, I really like to call the person back. And if not read the whole scene to them, at least talk through it. Like, here's what I'm trying to describe, and here's what I think I've got. Because when they start to hear it coming together, they really want to help you. And they're like, oh man, yeah. And then this happened. And they really help flesh it out for you.
Kelley, I think one thing that's really interesting about your description of that process with the reporter and editor is the idea of, working together to reconcile facts and narrative truth. And that when you take the reporting that you have collected, or that a reporter has collected, and you convert it from the facts of what was seen and heard to a narrative truth that includes those things and also is part of a larger story, you want to be checking in and making sure that one has not disconnected from the other. Can you talk a little bit about other ways that you do that?
Well, I'm just always constantly bouncing my assumptions off of people, like the source, of people around the source. I mean, a lot of times we think that we have to get this source. We must talk to X person. But when you talk to people who write tons and tons and tons of profiles, a lot of times they'll tell you that that's actually the least important part of it, that talking to everybody around the person is actually so much more useful, and looking at all of the artifacts and documents and things in people's lives. I mean, there is so much more information to be gleaned elsewhere. So if I have a theory or a working theme or assumption, I'm testing it against every person and record and piece of evidence that I can find. And it gets kicked around and it gets shaped, and it's just like a rock, and it just gets smoother and smoother and smoother over time.
I always think of, I think it was you maybe who told me, like, if you were describing a crime scene and there was the screen door was ripped, and you described that because, it's what you saw, it's what was there. Yes, the screen door was ripped, but then when you go back to your, like, this is why it's so important to go back to the source and say, you know, and then I, you know, included this and this and this. Maybe the screen door was ripped before the crime scene, right? And then it's no longer what you, the detail that you thought that it was. So I think we can sometimes forget that and get in that trap a little bit. So that's why it's so important to me, and as much as we can, especially when we're writing about really vulnerable people, to go back and tell them what's going to be in the story and say, you know, I'm sure that I got something wrong in here. I'm certain of it. So I need you to catch me. I need, you know, the last thing I want to do is mess this up because you've been so generous with your time. And so tell me when I get something wrong. If I describe, you know, how I wrote something to you and it's not how you really feel, you know, don't just let it slide. I want to know, kind of thing. Okay, Kelley, you have a really, your drafts come back with lots of cross-throughs in them. So how, when you edit people, how do you, like they, lots of cut this and this in like the best possible way so that the story is down to its essence. So how do you choose which details you think are the most important to be in the story? We talked about it a little bit before, but I just think that's so important.
I choose. Well, a lot of people say like you're supposed to cut big and then small, right? You're supposed to look at the big structural pieces and figure out like if the, you know, these 5 sentences can go or this, and that makes a lot of sense, but I kind of do it backward. Like first I kind of clean up the dead language for me, because a lot of times I can kick like 30% of a story out just by cleaning up dead language, like wordiness, ing verb forms, like that's really easy for me to do. And so when I'm like not in front of a reporter, but just like on my own, like I'll just like try to pair it to its essence or just outline it. Just like I'll do a reverse outline of a story and I'll just write what's there and then I'll just look at it. And a lot of times, even if we outlined before, we don't write what we outlined to. So I want to see what's actually on the paper. But if I can get it tighter, then I can see the big pieces that need to come out. It's easier if it's like, you know, if it's like a 3,000 word story or something. If it's a shorter story, then it's better. But I will do all the cliche editing moves. Like I will paste it to the wall. I will take a highlighter and highlight sections of scene and sections that are like explanatory and see what the ratio and proportion is. I will make sure that the front matches the end. Everything should be, it's, you know, this is someone else's cliche advice, but it's spotlight that shines from the first sentence to the end. And if it doesn't fall on that line, it has to come out. So there's you know, it's big pieces to that, and there are small, defined. Getting it down to subjects and verbs and doing a reverse outline helps me see what I have, what I'm looking at.
We have a question also from Diane Booth, which I think is related to this question of how you edit, how you coach somebody to revise, how you revise your own work, in terms of what you see the purpose being, and as you said, shining that spotlight from the very beginning to the end. Diane says, purpose sounds like agenda, as if the reporter focuses only on select information. And I'm curious, you know, agenda obviously is kind of a loaded word. So I'm curious how you think about the difference between a story's purpose and a reporter's agenda.
I think it's about what is it that your nut graph says, right? So there's always something that, you know, a piece of news or a piece of something that the story really is about. So it's about relating things back to that. Does it relate back to, you know, the piece of information that is new or something like that? And then it's also about trying to be honest to what your source shared with you. I mean, so often what the kind of stories that Kelley and I are doing are ones where we're trying to represent somebody going through some of the hardest moments in their life. And if you want the reader to feel what it was like to be them in that moment, then we have to make them feel those things. And that's what Kelley was talking about when, it's like things to touch and smell. So you're putting them there in the room, but also, what was going through their mind at the time, that kind of thing. It has to feel true to them. There are times when, I was interviewing an emergency department nurse yesterday, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Like thinking that she was telling me about this moment that was like super dramatic. And she was sort of like, that's just my job. Like the alarms go off, I have to rush in the room. That's just my job. And so then I know that I'm not going to make that a dramatic moment in the story because it's not that dramatic to her. So it has to feel true.
Yeah, I mean, the agenda is really simple. The agenda is, let me explain what these 5 minutes in your life were like as completely and accurately as possible. Now, we got to make choices about what the character we choose and which moment we choose, but my purpose is to do fewer things better, fewer things deeper, because we read so much that is incomprehensible, that is just so overgeneralized and so full of statistics that conflict with each other and change by the minute that we can't absorb any of it. So since we're here to talk about detail, and the purpose of detail is to put somebody in a place. That's it.
And to make something understandable to them. I mean, that's something that I've been so grateful for throughout this, is like the science reporters who are just like making it so myself, who hated science or whatever, can understand it. Sarah Kaplan had this line in her story about how the coronavirus particle is 1,000th the width of an eyelash, right? Like that makes all the difference. To me now, whenever I think of like, or see that little spiky ball, I understand how small it really is.
That's a great example of a detail that is not one that we hear over and over. It stood out. So Rana Natur asks, in a pandemic, these details can end up looking the same across stories. How do you make details stand out when so many other journalists are covering such similar stories?
Go, Jess.
Well, for one, I think that sometimes journalists, I have a bad tendency to think that just because I've read it, that means other people have read it. Most of my friends who aren't journalists aren't sitting around reading every coronavirus narrative and breaking news that comes out. So I have to remind myself of that. And then I think it just comes back a little bit to like, do you feel it, right? If it's still powerful to you, it might still be worth putting in the story, even if you know that it's kind of a known thing. And then I think what we've really been trying to do is just get down to specifics as possible, like rather than, write a story about how, like, just one short story we did earlier this year was about dentists, talking to, trying as much as possible, instead of focusing on, every dentist across the country and every patient in pain across the country, choosing one and trying to go deep with them. I mean, that's just sort of a principle that makes stories more moving and memorable all the time, but I think it's especially true now. What's a little bit different now is, I can't go and spend a bunch of time with that individual person. So we're having to be more creative with our stories. Sometimes stories aren't just about one person going through something. It goes from person to person, but when you meet a new person, the only detail, the only couple of graphs I'm putting in there are the essence of what I need them to tell a reader. I'm not giving a lot of background. I'm not giving a lot of, I'm just trying to show, this was the one really powerful detail about this person and what they're experiencing. And I give you that, and I'm not going to pad it with a bunch of other stuff.
We have another question that builds on how you described earlier interviewing differently. So Deborah Berry asks, you know, often we get details because we're sitting in the room or following them. Trying to do it from the kitchen cupboard to an office is more challenging, sometimes feels intrusive. You mentioned some of the ways that you're interviewing a little bit differently, maybe in ways that you would want to continue in some circumstances in the future after this. Any other tips for kind of maximizing the interviews by phone or by Zoom that, that you're doing and that you're coaching others to do right now?
I'll take it. There are lots of things. Prepping the source is really, really important. Explaining why you're doing this, or else it's going to seem super weird. Acknowledging the awkwardness of it, right? If I had a choice, I would never do it by Zoom if I could help it. It's just awful. The phone is, you know, we talk down about the phone. I tell my students, don't ever do it on the phone. But on intimate, because other senses are blocked out. Pulling in other sources. Okay, so let.
Is she freezing or is it just me?
Yeah, so we're,
Okay.
how ironic that as Kelly is talking about other senses.
This is why you can't do interviews on Zoom. Okay, maybe she'll come back to us in a minute. But we were just talking about, yeah, we've stopped. I've unless I will do maybe one of the interviews on Zoom that I'm with somebody. Oh, you're back. Hi. We were just talking about how terrible Zoom is. I mean, this is nice, but.
You froze, Kelly, right as you were saying the phone can be intimate, you froze. So say more about that.
Well, it's just two human voices connecting and everything else is drowned out. You don't have to worry about what you look like or like what you're freaking, that you're in your bedroom. It's so weird. I think the phone can actually be a really human connection, but you got to ask people to help you. You know, and tell me what you see. What's on your cell phone? What text messages have you received or sent today that you would feel comfortable sharing with me? Look back over the photos that you took that are on your phone that day. Did those jog any memories for you? Who else did you talk to, and what did you say? And what did they say? What did you say? What did they say? Did your, you know, what was your kids? Sometimes a totally meaningless reminder from a moment can spark other things. So like, what was on your Google Calendar that day? What did you have for dinner? And then they'll be like, oh, we had takeout because I had a big fight with the whatever. So I'm a big fan of bringing in other artifacts and documents and images, and even asking people to help. Like, so when you drive home from work, could you just open up the recorder on your phone and just talk into it as you drive and download everything you remember? They can decide later if they want to share it with you. And if nothing else, you're helping them create a history and a memory that's going to be important to them and their kids and their kids. And when we go back and check details with people, you know, we're not making them editors of our stories, right? But we are making them more aware of how they can help us tell their stories so that it's more true.
Great distinction, thank you. And that answers one of the other questions that somebody had asked. So if we haven't gotten to your question, I will share your questions also after this with Kelly and Jess, and if they are able to respond, I'll forward those on to folks as well. We're almost out of time, and I want to ask one last thing of you guys. You both have been recently involved with young journalists, either because you're in school with them or because you teach them. And, you know, obviously right now graduating into the journalism profession is different than at any other moment. And I wonder what advice you would like to offer somebody entering journalism now.
Jess, that's better for you. You're younger.
I would say, I think something that I learned from you, Kelley and Tom, is that you don't have to wait until you're at the publication you want to be at, or you're in the position you want to be at, to try to do the types of stories that you want to do, right? Like there's no way to learn to do narrative, immersive, immersive at this time, journalism, than to just go do it now. I used to think that, that was like something I could do one day. And especially now when we are being really, really challenged, you can learn so much. I'm learning so much about, how to do better interviews and that kind of thing, how to earn people's trust. And so I think if there's a type of journalism or a type of project that you want to do, now is the time that you start doing it. Because every time you do it, you get a little bit better. I used to think you'd get a little bit less scared, but like I'm still scared and still think that I'm not going to be able to hold up to a story, and that kind of thing. But I do think you get a little bit better at doing it. So yeah.
Yeah. The young people I work with are super type A, and they really want to do a good job, and they really want to grow up and be just Contrera. And I think they worry that if they don't know what they're going to be doing when they're 45, they can't start. They have to switch and just go to law school. Like, I guess my advice is just, this is fun, and it's one of the most rewarding things you'll ever do. And if you do it for 6 months, it'll make you better at any other thing that you do in your life. So that, to me, there's very little downside. Just stepping out there and being a part of telling the most important story of any of our lives.
Thank you. Thank you for that advice. As Beth just said in the chat, that's great advice for anybody in journalism at any point in their careers, so or considering it. So thank you. Thank you both so much for having this conversation with us. Thank you to everybody who is participating. We have other programs coming up. You can find information at pressclubinstitute.org or sign up to be notified, and we'll let you know when there are other programs coming like this. And again, thank you so much for spending this time with us, and I hope you learned as much as we did.
Thank you, Julie.
Sorry for all the wind.